Latest PR Moment webinar, and this one, as you can see in front of you, is all about the anatomy of influence, and we're running this one in partnership with our good friends at Onclusive. Thank you so much to their support and enabling us to put these types of webinars on for free. Much appreciate it. A little bit of intro admin from my good self before we kick things off with our wonderful speakers for today. Just to confirm, as I know it's something that always comes up, if you've got to take the dog for a walk or go and pick up the kids or something like that, we will be sending out a recording of all of our speaker sessions at the end of this webinar. So in that sense, I guess you can take copious notes if you find that useful. But to reassure you, you'll get a recording of all the presentations from this afternoon. Just a few things around the connections and how the webinar hosting service here from Ring Central works. We use Ring Service because we found it reliable and user friendly. But if you are having any connection issues, I do suggest you refresh your screens. Always a good idea to close all other applications, so don't have too many tabs open. Very often we find that it's connection capacity, I should say, issues with your broadband. So close out down any tabs you're not using. And if you are having any issues, always good to use the IT guys trick of logging out and logging back in and making sure you test your audio and your video as you do that. I tend to use Google Chrome or Firefox when I'm doing webinars, so that can work well depending on what browser you are using. Just to add, I put a few notes there just to welcome people on to the webinar today. But on the right of your screen, so you'll see a Q&A tab, or a chat tab, I should say. We use that for the Q&A. And the way that works is whenever you think of a question, just type it in there. And at the end of each of these sessions, each of our speakers there is talking about 15 minutes. There'll then be Q&A at the end of each presentation, and I'll read out your questions so everyone on today's webinar can hear it and is aware what the question is. And I'll try and get through as many questions as I can. I can't guarantee I'll get to them all because of the time constraints, but there's normally loads and loads of questions, so please do make the session today as interactive as you can. There's 300 plus of you who've registered, so it should be busy. And I'll go first come, first served, if you see what I mean. So the sooner you get your question in, the more likely it is that it will be answered. We always try and improve our webinars. So there is a short feedback question at the end, midway through the webinar today. So if you could just help complete that, we'd be really grateful. It's basically just a net promoter score type thing. Just to talk you through, and if we go to the next slide, please, Sammy. Little plug around today's running order. You're about to finish with me, but then next up we've got Hannah Forbes-George from Onclusive, and she's going to be talking about what brand influence is in 2026. So really important session there. Good bit of insight from some research that Onclusive have done. So looking forward to hearing about what Hannah's got to say about that. Next up, we've got Jack Peat, who's head of newsroom at Taylor Herring, and Jack's been he's been banging this drum for a while, but he's definitely got a point. He's got a really interesting perspective around whether PR agencies have been slow and have failed to grasp the scale of change in newsrooms. And his point, well, I'll let Jack talk about it in a bit more detail, but it's around that intersection of journalism and social content, and the type of content and the type of influencers that PR folks can reach specifically within the newsrooms. And be looking forward to hear what Jack's got to talk about that. And then it's always good to round things up with a good case study. And we've got Natasha Hill, who's MD and co-owner at Bottle, and she's going to be talking about Dame Zandra Rhodes and Stannah stairlifts, where accessibility, meets style. And just a little plug for our PR Moment Leaders scheme, a cracking scheme, our learning community program for senior folks within the PR agency world. Will Hart there's got a great cohort, 30-odd agency leaders on that. The feedback we get from that scheme is brilliant. So if you do want to, if you enjoy learning and you enjoyed this sort of webinar format, there's a whole load of masterclasses as part of that scheme. So do give Will a shout on that. Right, I think that's probably sufficient from my good self to welcome our first speaker for today, Hannah Forbes-George. And as I say, she's going to be talking about what is brand influence in 2026. Hannah.
Hello. Lovely. Thanks for having me. Sorry, a big dark cloud's just come over, so hopefully you can still see me okay. So my name's Hannah Forbes-George. I'm the Global Head of Content Marketing at Onclusive, and I've spent the last few months immersed in the data behind what I'm about to share with you. So let's just dig in and ask the question, what is brand influence in 2026? Well, as I'm sure you're all very well aware, the places a brand can show up have multiplied. We've got mainstream media, we've got social media, podcasts, and now also AI-generated answers as well. And I think the truth is that most measurement frameworks haven't really kept pace with that change. They're really good at telling you how loud you are, but they're not so good at really defining how much influence you actually have. And that's the question that we set out to answer in our study. So before we dig into the data, here's just a little quick word on who we are, because it is relevant to why we've built this research. So Onclusive is a global benchmark for integrated media intelligence. We turn enriched data into actionable insights across every channel: online, print, broadcast, and social. We work with PR and comms, marketing, and business intelligence teams to help them protect brand reputation, prove the impact of their work, and continue improve their value that they can deliver to their businesses. And it's this capability that's made this research possible. And it's why we're well placed to answer the question I'm about to put to you shortly. Allow me to introduce you to the brand influence rank. There's a QR code there if you'd like to download the full report. So here's what we did. We took the world's 100 most valuable brands, the full spread of global brand power, tech platforms, energy companies, fashion houses, consumer giants, every sector, every geography. We analysed all 100 of those brands and ranked them by their global media influence score. And that's something I will touch on in a minute. And we published the top 50 results in the Brand Influence Rank 2026. The question we asked was simple. What does media influence actually look like when you measure it properly? Not brand value, not revenue, but how effectively each brand shapes public perception through the coverage it generates and the conversations that it drives across social media. So how did we power this ranking? The data we used to build this came from two Onclusive tools. So firstly, we used Onclusive Monitor, which processes more than 28 million pieces of earned media content every single day, and also Onclusive Social. And that tracks conversations across almost every social platform you can think of in real time. And since we launched the report, we've also launched our brand new GEO analytics tool as well, which tracks how your brand is ranked and described across 5 different AI engines as well. And it can connect that directly to your earned media activity and shows you where to focus your efforts. And there's a QR code there for each tool, should you wish to find out a little bit more. So how did we actually define and measure media influence? Let's have a look at the methodology. So each brand gets 3 scores in the report, and that was measured over 12 months. So not just a short snapshot, it's a full year of how these brands actually showed up. So first, they were given a media score that covers mentions, reach, sentiment across mainstream press, digital and broadcast, and that included CEO mentions as well. They also then got a social score covering the same dimensions across social media. Also CEO mentions were included, and that was across LinkedIn, X, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Reddit. So not just 1 or 2 platforms, but the full range of channels where brand conversations actually happen. Then those 2 scores were combined into one global media score out of 400. And that is what determined their position in the ranking overall. And across the 100 brands that we analysed, that range ran from 4 to 328. And that gap alone tells you how unevenly media influence is distributed. When we were looking at the data, and we were analysing it, we saw 5 forces that just kept showing up that are building and reshaping influence at the moment. The first is generative AI. It's one that I feel personally, and all of the team here at Onclusive do, and I'm sure you do as well. And we know that according to McKinsey, 44% of AI-powered search users now use it as their primary source of insight versus 31% ahead of for traditional search. So how a brand appears in AI search is becoming a core influence driver. Closely connected to that is digital regulation. So Europe's Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act are reshaping the digital landscape. And the fines and enforcement actions of 2025 generated sustained media coverage and lots of social conversations around many of the brands within our ranking. And that continues to affect how these brands have been perceived around trust and ethics. And that continues today. And then there's the economic pressures. So with inflation still front of mind, the brands holding their position under economic pressure are the ones that are communicating real value, not just cost. Fourth, shifting consumer habits. People want personalized experiences. They want to see genuine sustainability commitments, as I'm sure you're aware, and cultural fluency. And they have gone from being a nice to have all the way up to being genuine, also genuine media influence drivers as well. And finally, innovation pressure. Brands willing to disrupt themselves, the Apples, the Amazons, and the Googles of the world, in the past have created trillions of dollars in value. But innovation can no longer purely be tech-driven. Companies are facing huge amounts of pressure to ensure that innovation brings a brand's meaningful difference to life rather than simply chasing the next technological advance. And these are the same pressures that your brands are dealing with every day as well. And we can see the effect of every single one of these in our data. So this is an important finding from the report, and I want to be clear that coverage still matters. Volume is part of the brand influence rank scoring model, but it's not the only, it's only part of the story. And I think this slide demonstrates it quite well. So if you look at these 3 brands, we've got YouTube, 23 million press mentions, 76% positive media sentiment, and they ranked first overall in our ranking. Then we've got Facebook, 35 million press mentions, the highest of the 3, but only 51% positive media sentiment and ranked 4th. And then LinkedIn, which had just 13 million press mentions, less than half of Facebook's volume, yet 70% positive sentiment. And it ranked 5th, 1 place behind Facebook on a fraction of the coverage. And what we did start to see was that the brands that were climbing the index aren't always the loudest, but they are definitely the most trusted in mainstream media. So that's the landscape. So now let's dig into what actually drives media influence, because that's understanding the levers is where this actually gets really actionable. And the first lever driving media influence is multi-channel presence. And YouTube is a clear illustration of why it matters. So YouTube was the only brand in the top 10 operating at the ceiling for both mainstream media and social media performance simultaneously. Every other brand in the top 10 had a gap, so strong on one channel, weaker on the other. And YouTube's social score spanned the full range of major platforms, and it leads on absolutely all of them. Its mainstream media score placed it 3rd overall for mainstream press coverage, and its positive media sentiment, as we already saw, is 76%, and that was the highest of the entire top 10. So this shows a really strong multi-channel presence for YouTube, which contributes to its first place ranking. But there is something else. As you probably know, as you will know, digital media routinely embeds YouTube videos into articles that have nothing to do with YouTube, political speeches and viral moments, for example. So YouTube is in a really special position where it is both the subject of coverage and also the vehicle for it. And that is a self-reinforcing visibility loop. And it's a large part of why it leads the ranking by such a big margin. Okay, moving on to lever number 2, sentiment. And specifically, what happens when you can't manage it. So we've got Apple, TikTok, Google, Facebook, all in the top 10 by media influence. But all 4 are sitting below the average positive sentiment across our ranking. So what do they all have in common? And what is causing it? were all four under sustained regulatory scrutiny. Last year, they faced either fines, legal battles, government investigations, and that's really shaped how journalists report on them month after month. And what's interesting is that these comms teams must be some of the most well-resourced comms teams in the world, and they still can't outrun those narratives. And it's just a really good example of how persistent regulatory coverage becomes. And then let's move on to lever number 3, which is CEO visibility, which is baked directly into our brand influence rank scoring model. I'll be honest, the Musk numbers stopped me in my tracks. I knew they would be really high, but the gap between Musk and everyone else is extraordinary, like 10 times higher than the second ranked CEO, Sam Altman. And the pattern underneath is what really matters. The tech CEOs are the direct spokespeople for their products, and their media presence and their brand's media presence are almost inseparable. And that cuts both ways. For example, as you'll see, when you see the ranking tables, Tesla ranks 13th in our index. Elon Musk actually generates more press coverage than the Tesla brand itself. And that was the most extreme CEO to brand imbalance of the entire ranking. Tesla's positive media sentiment sits at 39%. And I think that's a really good example of what happens when a CEO's personal narrative dominates the media story, independent of the brand's product performance. Lever number 4. And I think it's one that will matter most to you and to me over the next 12 months, is that 8 of the top brands, which are mainly tech brands, are either AI native or have placed AI at the center of their business strategy. And ChatGPT actually ranks in the top 10, not just as a tool, but as a brand we can all now cite by name. And that is a product that didn't even exist 4 years ago. But here's what the data is really telling us. These platforms aren't simply distribution channels. They're infrastructure where information is discovered. They determine which content is surfaced, how it's ranked, what gains momentum. So it's fair to say that influence really is no longer determined by who produces the most content, but by who controls how it's discovered and interpreted. And again, it cuts both ways. AI ambition drives coverage, but also controversy. If we look at Microsoft and ChatGPT, they generate huge amounts of volumes of media conversation from their AI narratives. And that shows up in their sentiment scores as well. So definitely being associated with AI gets you covered, but it doesn't necessarily, as we know, get you trusted. So here is the global top 10 by global media influence scores, remembering that those are out of 400. So we've got YouTube, Google, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, TikTok, and ChatGPT just getting in there in position number 10. Not a retailer, not a bank, not a consumer goods company in sight. Every single one of them is a digital platform or a tech company. Now, if we look at ranks 11 to 20, and I think this is where it gets interesting because it's where brands outside the tech tier start to appear. So we've got Netflix, Nvidia, and Tesla in positions 11, 12, and 13, tech still leading. But then we've got Disney at 14, Mercedes at 15, L'Oreal at 16. And it shows that non-tech brands can really still build genuine, massive media influence when the fundamentals are right. And L'Oreal was an absolute standout because they had 83% positive media sentiment, which was the highest of any brand in the entire ranking. Toyota, just below it, had 5.4 million press mentions and a positive media sentiment of 57%. And L'Oreal outranks it on a fraction of that volume, which tells you a lot. And it was the clearest proof point in the whole data set that sentiment quality can fully compensate for lower reach. So what does this really mean for your brand? Well, the gap between the top 10 and everyone else is real. They generate coverage simply by existing. But if you look beyond the top 10, and the picture gets more interesting, and indeed the top 50, which you can see inside our full report. They show that non-tech brands can build massive influence when the fundamentals are right. And those fundamentals are the things every comms team can control. Look at L'Oreal, 16th in the world for media influence, not a tech platform, no structural distribution advantage, just strong media sentiment built through consistent, trusted comms activity. So what does that really mean in practice? Well, 4 things, and I'd encourage you to think about, where your brand sits against each of them. So combine your media volume with sentiment quality, because coverage that isn't trusted doesn't really build influence. Make CEO visibility a deliberate strategy. Yes, it needs to be very, very carefully managed because it shapes perceptions in both directions, as Tesla has shown, but can have a hugely beneficial impact. Building a presence across every channel where audiences form opinions, so mainstream media, social media, and of course, we now need to do that in AI as well, and AI platforms. But the really important part is measuring all of those things together, because most teams still can't see directly how their earned media coverage, for example, is influencing what AI platforms say about them. And that blind spot is only going to grow. So sentiment, CEO visibility, and multi-channel presence are levers that every comms team can put on. So thank you so much for listening to that. I hope it's given you some useful food for thought. I would encourage you to download the full report because the findings in there are really interesting, and maybe your brand is actually even in there. I've talked a lot today about how AI is reshaping influence. And if that's got you thinking about where your own brand stands in AI search, that's exactly the question that GeoAnalytics is built to answer. And it monitors, diagnoses, and prescribes. It tracks your brand across 5 AI engines, surfaces the competitive context that makes the data meaningful, and it tells you where to focus your efforts. And best of all, it's integrated into our existing monitoring and listening tools, so you can measure it all in one place. And you can scan the QR code there to find out a little bit more. I'll come and speak to us after the session. Now, I think we have a couple of minutes for questions.
We definitely do. Thank you so much for that. It was great. Really enjoyed that insight. Couple of questions coming in. I have some as well. Marcus Austin asks, Facebook and Google are also referred to as Meta and Alphabet in the media, especially in the broadsheet and financial media. Did Onclusive look at the other names when they did the ranking, or was it just on those sort of?
It was very specifically brand names as opposed to the overarching company. So the brand names were all taken from the Kantar BrandZ most influential brands, most valuable brands in the world. So it was a very definitive set of 100 specific brand names.
Okay. Becky Hicks asked about Reddit. She was surprised not to see Reddit in the top 20. Why do you think that wasn't there?
That's a really good question. I do think they didn't make the top 50, but I think they may have been in the top 100. So I can look into that for you, Becky.
Fine. They're all, as you say, tech brands. Just think about taking a step back for a moment about the media. And I guess if we'd have done this 20 odd years ago, I don't know, maybe you'd have got, I would imagine we'd have seen more media brands in there, like the BBC or CNN or Sky. Were they? Where does the media fit into this global brands thing? Are they just way down, or were they not really part of the survey set? If you like,
they, from what I remember, and I can go back and look at. I've got a list of all the brands in there, but the brands like the BBC, the media, they were not in there simply because they did not feed into that initial data set of being the most valuable brands in the world.
I see what you mean. So it's good point. So it's the methodology wise, this is purely looking at the most valuable brands in the world and then ranking them. I understand. So in that sense, from a media perspective, they're kind of that would be a whole different piece of research.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
Gotcha. And I mean, has it always been like this? I mean, I'm just trying to think back to the 90s. We don't know, right? So this is not many years have gone past. So, but do you imagine they would have done this piece of analysis 20 years ago, that it would have been, you've had far more financial brands in there, and it wouldn't have been as dominated by big tech?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it would have definitely been a case of, Coca-Cola, for example, would have been up there in that top 10. And it used to be really a case of whoever's the biggest, whoever's got the biggest budgets, those are the brands that are going to win. But actually now it's so much more, it's so much harder work than that. And it's the people, the brands that are really putting that time in to the multi-channel presence, build that trust, that are really seeing that they can come to the top.
Absolutely. Christopher Norris asks, did you take demographics, into consideration regarding influence? Yeah, it's quite an interesting nuanced point, I suppose, isn't it? For example, Facebook is more popular with boomers and Gen Z, Gen X. Is that,
No,
I mean,
it
maybe
didn't.
there's a data set behind this, but yeah, okay.
Oh, there are so many routes that we could go down with this. I just wish we had the time and the resource to do all of that. But yeah, that would show up so many more interesting insights as well. We didn't look at the demographics. No, we looked very much at the reach, the mentions, the sentiment, the impact of the CEO, just to really build that big picture of media influence.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just think about Musk for a moment, because that is worth some commentary, isn't it? In terms of the level, his was it the number of followers or score relative to the next person down? I mean, Sam Altman. That's just. Do we have an understanding of what's caused that, other than just this extraordinarily successful individual who is either incredibly media savvy or incredibly or always has another story to tell?
Yeah, I think when you look at Tesla's sentiment score at 39%, what we can say is Tesla's appearing in the top 13 despite what the CEO is doing, as opposed to because. Obviously he's generating the volume, but a lot of it is not always, what the brand would want to see, and it definitely isn't something that it would be enjoying. So
Yeah.
I think the really important part there is, yes, he is driving a massive amount of media influence, but it's pushed the sentiment right down.
Right. There's a whole other webinar probably around Tesla's share price correlated to Musk's media presence and scandal. Not really scandals, that's doing him a disservice, but yeah, you know what I mean. Hannah, Forbes, George, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed some good insight there. There's so many different layers, that sort of research. Mm-hmm. You could continue, I'm sure, but thanks for a brief summary there. Much appreciated, and encourage people to download it as and when they can. We'll send a link out to that research in the show notes as well. Okay, next up, in this fast-paced webinar, we've got Jack Peat, who is head of newsroom at Taylor Herring, and Jack's going to be talking about a subject that's very close to his heart, around, I suppose, the how newsrooms are reforming and the opportunities for PR folks within that brave new world. Jack, welcome. Thanks so much for coming on, and over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Ben. And yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak today and obviously to tackle, as you pointed out, what I believe to be one of the big questions in the comms industry right now, which is, of course, whether we are keeping up to speed with the scale and the pace of change in newsrooms and the implications that has on our industry. And I think that there's a broad acceptance that when it comes to influence, social is a big part of the mix. We know that from our own media consumption habits, how we consume content and how we discover and interact with brands. But what I will be questioning today is whether organizations have truly grasped what this shift means for the way that we operate, because social has changed everything from consumption to distribution, authority, and ultimately who gets to shape the narrative and who wields influence. Sorry. Now, I've been lucky enough to observe a lot of this from the coalface over the last 15 years. I've worked in news before joining Taylor Herring to head up their newsroom. So most recently, I was at Joe Media Group as the editor, but also with the London Economic, which I founded back in 2013 as a digital newspaper that in turn became a social publisher as this great flip-flop between channels gathered pace. And today I want to address three things. The first is why newsrooms have changed and why influence of social newsrooms is growing. Then I want to sort of move on to whether the comms industry is keeping pace, and then to go on and discuss how you can evolve your offering to meet demand where it's at. And there are a few better places to start when it comes to addressing why these seismic changes are happening within the newsroom than on the tube or the train home. Perhaps not today, of course, they're all out on strike. But generally, the answer to why newsrooms are changing can be found by observing commuters and realizing that news consumption is poles apart from what it used to be, and that commuters aren't reading newspapers anymore. They watch and read everything in 9:16, demand instant gratification, and have the attention span of a gnat. And that's something even the boldest tabloid newspapers are struggling to contend with. And here's the proof in the pudding. 52% of adults use social media for news. It's overtaken TV now as one of the biggest drivers of news consumption. And that obviously just gets more extreme the younger you get. So if you look at sort of the Gen Zs of this world, 71% of those are accessing news via social media. Even when it comes to online news itself, most of that is actually accessed through the side door, effectively. So through social, which hands it over to them, which is handing social newsrooms a great deal of influence. And take a walk around DMG's newsroom, for example, or any others, and you'll find that the desks that were once reserved for news correspondents and sub-editors and travel writers are now filled with TikTok teams and Snapchat producers and Instagram creators, something that I've viewed firsthand on several occasions. And there is no mistake in the fact that the publishers are going all in on this social news revolution. The Daily Mail has got a 35 person Snapchat team producing 60 top snaps every day of the week. If you'd have told me that there would be a new news desk with 35 people manning it a few years ago, I wouldn't have believed you. Metro likewise is employing an increasing number of journalists who are tasked purely with social channels, and their growth has been phenomenal as a result. And one of the other ones that I really like to reference as well is the work that's been done within Reach PLC, where they've effectively got a brand for their 16-34-year-old demographic, but they've also got a board which is staffed by young people. So you've got a board within a board that's sort of feeding up answers to the executives about sort of like news consumption, where it's at, so they can keep in pace with the change. And effectively it presents a little bit of a problem for the comms industry. Taylor Herron's own research, which we produced last year in our report, The News is Dead, goes into some depth about that, and it looks at whether effectively journalists are getting what they need from comms professionals. 54% of those that we surveyed say that PRs are rarely supplying multimedia assets, for example, that work on platforms like TikTok, Snap, or Instagram. 57% say upwards of 90% of press releases that they've been most of their press releases because they're not newsworthy. 93% of journalists ignore press releases because they're overly promotional. 82% of social news journalists are saying pictures are extremely important, whereas the rest say they are important. So there's a lot in there. Effectively, we need to find out what we need to do in order to fit into that mix. And what we found, that there's a sweet spot, when you want to address how to reach people on social. First of all, you need to sort of consider what they are going social for. And ever since the pandemic, I think the news environment has been littered with bad news upon bad news. Daily updates of how many people have perished have been replaced with doom and gloom updates on the economy, political life, and the very fabric of society itself. The graphics that we often use when it comes to social is when we see when people see the graphic on the left, what they often think of is the graphic on the right. So effectively, what we've got to consider is what do we need to do to address that? And within our agency, we have a mantra which is entertain or die. And I think that that's served us quite well recently. And now it really underscores the fact that now more than ever, we PRs have to think like editors and meet that demand and help them sort of like fill the gaps and actually sort of do most of the job for them, because effectively they are reaching audiences in a completely new way, and what we're sending them at the moment isn't really fit for purpose. So first of all, what do editors need? And I can tell you this from 15 years of being one. We need to sort of think about how we capture attention. So most people, well, they say that the time frame in which we have to grab people's attention now is between 1 and 3 seconds. And if you consider again your own news consumption habits, I think you'll probably see that that's true. The flick of a thumb now is incredibly fast. The thumb has never been as powerful. It takes us absolutely no time at all to decide whether a piece of content is interesting or not. And effectively, what we need to do is cater to that and accept the fact that editors are sort of forever at the mercy of these algorithms, which can make content that was seemingly popular one day and completely unpopular and irrelevant the next. Which means for us, we have two masters now, effectively. We have the editor and we have the algorithm. And unfortunately, only one of those can be smoothed with nice meals and wine and beers out. And the algorithm is the thing that's increasingly dictating what influence looks like. Algorithms only care about things like engagement signals. They only care about visual performance, and they only care about whether your content can keep people on their platform. They care about very little other things, and that's something that we have to consider when we're creating content ourselves. Which is why we come to something what I call the Holy Trinity. Everything that's good works in threes, right? And this is the thing that really works well in threes for me, and has served me well over my years. You've got to ask yourself at the start of anything that you're producing, anything that you're pitching, whether the thing that you've got as the headline is working really well with the visual and working well with what would be a social caption, and they're all working in synchrony. As another Ben Smith, this one from Lad Bible, once told me, the social post has to tell the story as much as the copy behind it. And you've got to think about, from an editor's perspective, the first thing we're often considering is, how do I put this out on social? And if that's not immediately evident from what we're receiving, it's actually given us a bigger job to do in terms of getting this over the line and actually publishing it. So what we're talking about in practical terms, effectively, is a expansion of the PR toolkit. If you think back to sort of like how the old a toolkit would read, you'd usually have a long form press release, low res photography. You would have text heavy, burdened journalist phone calls, all that kind of stuff. All of that needs to go and be rethought effectively, because really what social news editors and editors in general are increasingly looking for is that sort of native short form video, things that they can make their own, but also can capture attention. Is the content specific to the platform? Are we doing interesting things with the data rather than making it really burdensome? Creator-led content. There's various other things now that go into it, and really we're talking about the mechanisms that we used to use, the simple press release with a few images, are simply not fit for purpose anymore. And the other thing that you've got to be careful not to do, and the thing that I see PR agencies do the most, is think of social as if it's something that falls out of the back of everything else, when it should be the starting point. Effectively, when you start in a campaign, I think the first question, given what we know about how people consume news, is what's the social idea? What's the social route? How are we going to make this into something that works on TikTok as well as works in print? Or maybe it starts there entirely. And to that point, there are a few routes that I've mapped out here, the 4. And what I would really urge people to do is make sure that these routes are things that you consider at the outset, not when it gets to the sort of like the media relations part of a campaign, right at the end when we say, oh crap, we actually haven't got a social idea here. We need to go back to the beginning. So effectively, the first one is that, think about whether this is a campaign that actually starts out on social, whether you even need a press release. Is that something that's sort of necessary? In this one, is it going to engage social editors? Is it going to get the cut through? 3 campaigns that I just effectively wanted to get up first and foremost. You will know of the Severance campaign in New York Central. Fantastic campaign. Why was it so good? Because effectively they knew how many people loved the show. They said, come along, get your cameras out and do the marketing for us. So effectively, rather than spending loads of money on flashy ads, they told people to come along and do it for them. And it was hugely influential and, really chimes with the sort of like the platform native content that people are really eating up at the moment. Another one I saw recently is the Kit Kat a campaign where they sort of created a wrapper that was a signal blocker for mobile phones so that people do take a break. Again, this is all in the visual. It's all in the actual things that are happening. Doesn't need wordy, lengthy press releases to explain the concept. It just needs a really good visual. And another one that was Uber Eats, I believe. They posted a really candid picture of someone eating a Sunday lunch out of a Tupperware box. Just so powerful, and it's the sort of stuff that goes viral and then gets the news traction as a result. Really, really, really good stuff. The second is to consider creating social campaigns that are in step with everything else that you're doing. A quick example on this is something that we did for EasyJet. They launched a base in Southend, and obviously that was big news for regional publishers, and to an extent it was good news for it was news for like the likes of BBC and ITV, who want to sort of like talk about the recruitment part of it. But we knew that wasn't going to be enough for social journalists to capture. So what we did is we came up with a range of gelato or ice creams, gelato ice cream, that effectively featured their destination. So we came up with we created tagine ice cream for Tunisia. We came up with escargot ice cream for the new routes to France, and we sent them out. And we said to journalists, to social news journalists, here's the thing, you get involved with it, you do it in your own way. And I think that's one of the fundamental things that people often overlook, that when it comes to these unique publishers that are doing content in unique ways, what they really want is to have license to just do it precisely how they want to. And so usually it comes down to just providing them with the props in order to sort of like let them do their thing in a way that complements the story as a whole. And another angle, one that we're increasingly using, is this sort of like notion about using burner accounts. So just sort of seeding social content out and then letting it do its thing. So we did that most recently with a Harry Styles lookalike who we got papped in an Aldi just before the Brit Awards, where he obviously appeared. And it was really candid. It's really sketchy. It's not sort of like high quality visuals, and nor does it need to be. This is the whole point about social media. We want that rough and ready content, and we posted it on a few accounts, and then sent it to some good friends. Got picked up and went viral. That was on GMB. Everybody was talking about it. It of course wasn't him, but it was a lot of fun. And obviously, finally, don't discount the role of pure PR in all of this. Effectively, there's a lot of things that we say about we've said about PR for generations now, which still ring true now. And one case study with that is something that we did for Vocation Brewery. I effectively said, listen, we've got a beer. I'll take you out for a beer to sort of sample it, but also I'd love to know your thoughts, Lad Bible, on how this could fly. And they said, well, everyone's always talking about these brilliant beer moments. The first beer on the balcony on holiday. The waiting for the takeaway beer, all those sort of different beers. Why don't we just do a big list of that and put Vocation at the heart of a campaign about great beers? And that got a huge amount of traction. I think it got about 57,000 likes on their Instagram. It got shared tens of thousands of pounds. But that was just going back to sort of like the basic nuts and bolts of PR, which is getting people involved from the start, making sure that publishers are working in collaboration with us. And I think it speaks to the other angle, which I pointed out earlier, which is all about how a lot of these social channels have got a really unique tone of voice. That's why they are what they are. And it's really about respecting that from the offset. So just to sort of like recap a few things that we discussed there. The first is that newsrooms have changed, and they've changed simply because the way that people consume news has changed. Next time you're on your commute, look for how people are consuming content. Observe your own consumption habits. That's something I say to my team every day. That's really important. Obviously, we've seen that publishers are going all in on social news, and it's for a good reason. You know, where the Sun used to reach 3 million people in print, it now reaches that in half a day on social. You know, the key to getting cut through on social is to acknowledge the fact that people are actually probably going to social to get away from the sort of like the dull and depressing things that often encompass the everyday life. So try where you can to be entertaining, definitely be less polished, and create content that is native to those platforms, and make sure that social is coming in at the start of all campaigns as the first consideration. Social first creativity is going to be the key to getting cut through moving forward. Expanding your toolkit so you've got all those new things included in it, and you're not just sort of like sticking to the text-laden heavy releases that effectively social news editors will look at and bin. And finally, do a bit of Taylor Herring, bring light to the shade, and entertain or die. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. I think there's been a few questions.
Great stuff, Jack. Thank you very much. Right, we're going to go quick fire because there's a few questions. Just to put this into some context, really, part of what you're saying is that you need to, from a PR perspective, I think whether it's consumer, B2B, whatever, you're trying to, you've got multiple audiences with your campaigns, one of which are journalists. There's also algorithms, but there's also creators within either individual creators, or part of the role of some of these journalists is around creating social content for content for the social channels. Is that right in essence? Because there's a few nuances within that within what I've just said.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously you've got social news publishers that are only on social news, on social platforms. So there is that strand to it. Then you've got the sort of, precisely, if you talk about the national publications, you will have conversations between traditional editorial desks and the social teams. And the social teams will be tasked with, how do I make that into a social piece of content? And effectively, if you as comms professionals have given them a really easy way of doing that, then you win. But effectively, you know, it's all social, really, I would argue, because, you know, everything we're trying to create talkers, trying to create engagement in the stories, the things that we're putting out. Even the people who are writing in traditional mediums want people to tweet about their stuff, and even, you know, from a digital perspective, social is the gateway to their content. So I was a digital journalist, but my number one focus for a lot of my career was, how does that work on social? Because if you don't get the shop window right, then you're not going to get people in. It's the old adage of sort of like, how do you window dress to make sure that people actually come in the first place? And that is right. Social.
I'm going to jump around the questions, but I will come back to the other ones. But there's a really nice question, I think, from Monica Green about how effective is this approach in relation to B2B campaigns. I mean, from my perspective, PR Moment is clearly a B2B mag. I'm nodding my head to all this stuff. I mean, as a journo in B2B, you know, it's the application of the same stuff in a different market.
I completely agree. I mean, not to get too reductive about it, but you know, businesses are people and social is people. So, you know, when it boils down to it, you are still talking about the same principles, which is, you know, is that person who's involved in that business going to be interested enough in your content to stop scrolling? So you still have a very short window in which to grab their attention, get them to cut through. Usually that's visual. Usually it's about those things working together. I think that B2B, you know, doesn't fit into the sort of like traditional I'm vocation brewery, put me on Lad Bible sort of campaigns, but it's still the same rules do apply, because it's still about social, which is about people, and it's still about business, which is being run by which are being run by people.
Right. We've got loads of questions, Jack, so we're going to have to be a bit quicker. Andy Green asks, is the sweet spot news, entertainment and conversation to achieve impact and shareability? Social is a strong starting point as it starts with the conversation. How do you create better talkability? I mean, that's a big old question, but that's his point around talkability is the key there, I think, from Andy. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, we're here today to talk about influence. And I think the three things that he's identified there are precisely that. You know, I think I see influence really being when a campaign has done well for me, when I see virality and I see shareability and I see people talking and comments. One of the big metrics, again, going back to my publishing days, was always about comments. So you would do well on likes and you would do well on reshares, but the thing that you would do most well on by far is comments, because effectively it goes back to this whole thing about social publishers want you to stay on their platform, want you to talk within each other, want to be a forum, and that's all they want to be. So the talkability of a campaign is so crucial, and journalists will know that.
Right, which is, yeah. Karen Ridges asks, when working with solopreneurs, one-person bands with tiny budgets, what's the best way forward? Not a media release, ? Ask them to film some pieces to camera when relevant. I guess, yeah, just taking down from that, this approach that you're using for some big brands with some bigger budgets, and thinking about how you might implement it with smaller budgets and smaller brands.
Yeah, and again, I think this boils down to, you know, the thing that social did is allow anyone to be a creator. So really, it's very hard to sort of like comment on individual without knowing the sort of like the business and the niche itself. But really, like solo entrepreneurs should be empowered by social media, and really, I would say step away from press releases. You know, I don't know what purpose they serve right now. If it's about fame, it's about sort of getting out there and being a creator yourself. You've got something that you're good at, clearly, because you're doing it. To talk about it, find your niche within that, and use social as that springboard. It's so powerful for that.
Absolutely. Samantha Bandek, she alludes to a really interesting point around, she works in a house and her role is specifically about the media, with social media in a separate function. How can I adapt this approach without making my role redundant? I mean, I suppose it's not so much about hopefully your role being redundant, but those internal divisions that you find within historical divisions, perhaps, that you find within in-house teams across marketing, PR, comms, social. They can be problematic with this approach, can't they?
Yeah, and I think that obviously, like, you know, when we talk about influence in general, which is, you know, across, I think the previous speaker touched upon it. It's across now AI, it's across social, it's across all these channels. So really, what we're looking for is brilliant stories that speak to all of these channels. And you know, if you can go in with, I've created this story, it's a media story, but you can see the virality, you can see the talkability, all that kind of stuff. Then the social teams are getting involved. It's going to be really important. Ultimately, we are so back to the sort of old PESO model. By the way, I think that's going to be the defining aspect of what we do moving forward, and good storytelling will be at the heart of all of that.
Right. Helen Lacey asks, well, it's another point about the press release around what is the role of the press release and how is it best used? Bearing in mind it takes a long time to put these things together and get signed off. I mean, I sort of see it as a hub of content really now. It makes you, it creates text, video, pictures, and then you can use it as a place to a hub where you can slice and dice that content depending on what media or what creator or what journalist it's most relevant for.
Yeah. So just reflecting on what, as an editor, I would look at press releases and I would see what I'm trying to do in a very short period of time is identify what that holy trinity is. So I'm looking for what my headline is, how that social sell is going to go with it, and how I'm going to use visuals that you supplied me to sort of marry all that up to get the buy-in. So I'm looking for the buy-in from a social audience just as much as you are. And so really the press release has to tell me that instantly. It has to tell me why those three things work together and get to it really quickly. And obviously, as we go down, we can get into the nuts and bolts of it. But really, it's that top bit that needs to tell me, why does your story allow me to do those three things?
Yeah, exactly. And yes, hopefully somebody can, but why should I give a toss about this release? If you see what I mean, that's the key, isn't it?
Well, it's why should my audience give a toss?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah. Laura Spinks, I should say. Sorry. Is email the best way to sell in? I mean, that's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, WhatsApp is that the media relations channel of choice now? It's difficult to sum that one up, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that it depends on what your relations are. I only got WhatsApps from people I knew were sending me good stuff and would send stuff that was right for me. Like if you're bombarding me with WhatsApps on things that aren't relevant for me, that's the worst way. Emails would be good because you can sort of like shift through emails and you get a lot of them in a day. But I would always do an email because it's a good way of getting all that content in there. But the best way to pitch is always, I know that this is going to work for this guy. I'm just going to give him a 3-liner. And that could be over WhatsApp saying, by the way, I love what you did the other day. I've got this great story for you. Is it of interest? And then you use email to send the bulky stuff across. But get that buy-in first by using other channels, even Instagram.
It is tricky though, isn't it? Because we'll leave it there, but you're trying to manage the LinkedIn inbox, your email inbox, WhatsApp, and it just goes on and things get slightly out of hand. Jack, thank you so much. That was great. Really enjoyed it. Touched on lots of things there. Hope you enjoyed that one, folks. Really insightful stuff, Jack. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Okay, and finally, we've got a case study. And to talk us through a case study about Dame Zandra Rhodes and Stannah stairlifts, we've got Natasha Hill from Bottle. Natasha, welcome. Thanks so much for coming on this webinar today. Really looking forward to hearing all about this interesting case study, which I guess touches across lots of things that we've already talked about on the show so far.
Indeed. I would say that it's a bit of a shift. It's all still about influence, but given the nature of the topic that we're talking about, or the product that is the main product of the brand we're talking about stairlifts. The audience of Stannah stairlifts are not on Snapchat, you might be surprised to hear. So it was a very different challenge to what we've just been talking about. And just a little story about the journey that we've been on, because the Zandra case study I will get to at the end, but a little journey of how we took this brand from one that is focused only in PR at the time, 8 years ago, and they were only in the trade media, and they knew they needed to elevate their brand. And so in order to elevate their brand, our job really was to reposition the brand from one that is a seller of stairlifts, which basically puts people in the mobility space and thinking about old people who can't walk upstairs. And therefore you can imagine the lifestyle glossies weren't that interested in that. We had to take the media on a journey of influence in order to get this brand in high quality publications. So in all honesty, the first year it was a tough slog. We had to move from mobility media into the grey media, or that was the natural next step. And it started off in the maybe lower quality grey media, and we were then able to get into some of the higher quality glossy grey media. So sexy. And then we moved into consumer media, and we got into some of the very well read weekly titles that you'll be familiar with. But that obviously wasn't good enough for us. The client was very happy with that, but we wanted to keep pushing. And so we knew that in order to get really high quality reach, bearing in mind a Stannah stairlift is the most expensive stairlift in the stairlift category. And that's because every stairlift, particularly if it's not a straight up and down set of stairs, is a bespoke made stairlift for that individual staircase. And therefore we needed to get to the high net worth audience, and the national media were really important. top glossy lifestyle magazines were really important, and we also needed to get to people who were thinking about the longevity of home design and architecture type media. So that was really what we wanted to do and set out to do. Stannah themselves weren't demanding that because they didn't think they'd ever get there, because they kept thinking of the product and we kept talking to them about the brand. So we set out to set with that challenge on our own, but the media were not impressed, because they were thinking, as soon as I think about Stannah, they're like the Hoover of the vacuum category. They think of old people going up on stair lifts just like this. And to say that they would be a reluctant purchase is probably more positive spin on it. They're actually a distressed purchase. People don't typically choose to have one until they've had a fall. And then it's essential. They're not allowed to leave hospital until they have a stair lift. So that was the challenge that we had on our hands. The media were really against it because they felt that it really aged their audience profile. So if they were to talk about Stannah, synonymous with stair lifts, their perception was how I'm effectively aging my audience reader. So this is where our Stannah influence journey began, and I'm going to take you back to 2020. By then, we'd had the account for 2 years, and we'd managed to get our hands on their Facebook account as well. Later on, we also got their Instagram, or we started their Instagram account, but back in the day, they already had a Facebook account, probably a whole load of dormant people. But we managed to reactivate that and bring in new followers and do a really good job on Facebook. But this is where we persuaded them to lean into their first influencer campaign. And when I say campaign, it was really an influencer contract. So what we did back in lockdown, we'd already moved on the Stannah storytelling strategy to thinking about independent living. So what do independent livers do in their home? It's all about being active in your home, and it's all about holding on to the hobbies that you care about, your passions. And so we'd often be talking about things like gardening and baking. And as we know, in lockdown, baking went mad. And so what we did was enlist our first influencer, who was we're going to call her B-list celebrity. She was Val Stones, who was she was actually runner-up of Great British Bake Off. And what we did to persuade Stannah to use Val was think about those guiding principles. So it had to be media first. So it wasn't a social first influence like we do with most of our other clients, but earned was the biggest challenge, and that's where we needed to start. But we wanted to create an earned first relationship with someone who we would also be able to use across social as well as on-page content. They had to be relatable. So age-wise, they had to be relatable. And they needed to be expert in a topic that we knew our audience were already interested in, so like-minded, and be able to give some educational value-add content. And also the longevity of the relationship was really important to Stannah. They're a family-owned business, have been going over 150 years. They're like that, luckily, with their agency relationships as well. They really wanted someone who was more, I guess, more ambassadorial than a pure influencer as we think of them today. So welcome Val. She was an absolute dream. She the key component of all of the influencers that we've since used is that we position them as experts for the brand, and they're all present on the website. They do blog content, and they do social, or we repurpose that into social content, but most importantly, we use them mainly in the media. So that's the contractual kind of framework that we have. And then by year 2, we'd built what we called the collective. So we thought about all the key topics that help describe people who are independent living. And we packaged up a range. We typically have 4 in a given year, and then we rotate or swap out, swap in, but they're all contracted for, most of them have been for a minimum of 2 to 3 years, but we do refresh. So we have Val from baking. We had accessible gardening with Mark Lane, who is from, you might know from Gardener's World and BBC. We've got Dr. Poonam, who's a celebrity GP, and we've got Anjuna there, who is really well known for, well, she's a psychologist, but really good from a relationship point of view, because obviously relationships in older years is also really important. And then we have inclusive designers and more occupational health type topics as well. And those are the content assets that help us get into the media with these experts. And that is what's really turned our PR efforts for Stannah around. So Stannah now dominates share of voice in earned media significantly compared to their competitors. We are well known in the high quality, more glossy lifestyle media, and as a independent living expert in national media too. And we're often the journalists come to us for stories, and typically each month we have these kind of lovely publications in our coverage books. So that collective influencer strategy has worked really well for many years now. Come on 4 years though, and we still hadn't cracked, for good reason, the fact that we hadn't featured the actual product, i.e. a stair lift, in any of our top tier editorial. And we're still back to the age-old issue that the journalists don't really want to age their readers. But we knew that Stannah were creating a brand new, much better aesthetically pleasing styled chairlift, stair lift, and this one had design principles at its heart, and it was there to myth bust the typical stereotype. The stereotype being, oh, let's fold it up, let's hide it away, let's camouflage it as much as we can in the home, whereas this stair lift was designed to be out and proud. So that was a great challenge to really think about a lift style icon at a level that we hadn't really gone to before with Stannah. So our principles were that we needed to find a design-focused campaign icon. We needed it to be visually arresting so that the media would actually consider taking a picture image in the editorial, and we needed to make sure that we were growing brand equity and people were actually thinking that this was an aspirational purchase and a smart way to think about their future living needs. So they were the campaign goals, and last one was to get the freaking stair lift in the media, and that was our internal bottle's main objective. So where do you go to for an influencer who is going to achieve that? So we looked far and wide. We thought about the age demographic. We needed the readers, and bear in mind the audience are still reading the media. They might be reading it on their iPad, but they are still reading the media. And they needed someone of a similar age who was willing to have a stair lift installed in their home, because we knew it had to be really credible. So this was not an easy ask. Actually, it turned out to be easier than we thought, because the number one designer that we had on our list said yes straight away. And that was Dame Sandra Rhodes. She is an icon. For those who don't know her, she's been a fashion designer and textile designer for many years. She's really well known for her bold prints, and she's clothed the likes of Freddie Mercury and Diana, Princess of Wales, as well as some living people. But she is known for her flamboyancy, and also her home is one that she's lived in for many years, and it has featured in the likes of Vogue, for example, because she's quite bold in her design aesthetics, and is a little bit wacky. So we thought there's no way she's going to have a stair lift fitted, but lo and behold, she was really delighted to be involved in the campaign. So what did we do? We got everything done we had a day, just less than a day of her time, and we had to ram all the things that we needed to make this campaign work really well. So one installation, obviously we didn't install it in that day, by the way, that was done in advance, but the installation happened, and yes, she got a free, brand new, top of the range, first off the belt almost, stair lift designed specifically for her staircase. We had 2 media exclusives, one national media with the Metro and one trade media with a title called This. I hope you don't ever need to look at that, but yeah, it's very cool. Mobility trade media is the number one. 2 photo shoots, one with Metro and their photographer, and one we chose Getty as our photographer that we could use for wider selling, videographer shoot so that we can get film assets for social, media interview, blah, blah, blah. So it was a full-on day with a couple of dress changes, outfit changes and things for Sandra, some breaks, some interviews, and that enabled us to have all the assets that we needed for the launch. So what we achieved was a 3-page feature in the Metro in print, and also went online. And yes, you can see that big circle there, which is the actual stair lift in action in the Metro in a national media. So objective number 1 for us was achieved. The key messages were fully were written out in full, and we had brand mentions, product mentions, etc. So we were really happy with that exclusive piece in the Metro. We got the front cover that we didn't expect to get, but we got the front cover in the number 1 trade publication, and that was a real coup from for a brand point of view and also a competitive point of view for Stannah and the Stannah family. They were over the moon with that. And then we also got an example of one of our broader, wider sell-ins, Telegraph. They allowed us to actually write the byline, so we were able to get the actual name of the product in there and when it would be available to buy, etc. So very happy with things like that. And then in terms of social, so Sandra's own social following is something like 120,000 followers. So not crazy in the scheme of social media influencers. We weren't choosing her for her social media following, but her own, not her, this was the Stannah posted point of view video. That was Stannah's top performing post ever, with 270,000 views and 210 engagements. And then Stannah's own post was her top performing from her own feed in 2025. So a whopping 1,455 organic engagements. And some of the people that were posting, I mean, this is just a few of the verified accounts of some of the fashionista community that clearly follow her, and they just loved the fact that she was out and proud, having a stair lift fitted in her home, looking after herself, kind of showing her vulnerability and her age and her pride for her age, and knowing that it was the smart thing to do. She doesn't need it every day. She doesn't need to go up it now, but she, there was lots of funny things about her, about how helpful it would be to send up her cocktails for the evening. And so we have won quite a few awards or been recognised by the community for this. So we won a Sabre Award the other week. PR Moment, we didn't win this year. We did win last year, but not with Sandra, for the Influencer Award category. And then we've got 2 more that we've been shortlisted for, and we're waiting to find out. But it was great to see that Stannah have never ever been put in for an award, because they don't normally spend budget on campaigns. But they have been over the moon on this, and Sandra herself wanted to come, Ben knows this, wanted to come to the PR Moment Awards. I dissuaded her because I told her it would be a very late night, and she didn't come in the end, but which I was quite relieved of. But yeah, she's been an absolute gem. And so key takeaways: think big. We didn't have a huge budget for this. The Sabre Award that we won was for low budget campaign of the year. So do think big. You're often surprised. We never thought we'd get a Dame to do this job for Stannah. Social following isn't the only currency. Remembering the role that influence can play in the media as well, particularly for this age cohort and this product category. And then make it really easy to give you more value. So when you're thinking about the contract, we worked really hard to think about how we could use her time and how we could make sure that the different parties that were going to come together to build the assets for us, including ones that weren't our own third parties like Getty and Metro, for example, how could we make the most of that, including, chunking down some of the spokesperson quotes so that we could tailor it for different types of media verticals and different types of story angles. And yeah, that's a beautiful campaign for someone that you wouldn't expect, an 86-year-old influencer, but it worked incredibly well. Any questions?
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Natasha. Tough brief, that one, I imagine, when it came across your desk, but congratulations on putting it together. I mean, as you alluded to there, that one of the reasons we included that one was because it was such a tough brief, and it wasn't the normal type of work you think about when you're talking about social creators and social channels. So it was good to see it all come to life. I guess if there was one key element that you had to name about that campaign and why it worked, was it the choice of the celebrity?
It was. Yeah, without doubt. I think because she's so iconic in the fashion world, we wanted a design first representative for the brand, and we wanted to break conventional thinking. And so I think she was so out there in terms of our number one. The next tier were nowhere near as good as her, because they were either not as well known, not as well accredited, or they were much more on either the fashion or the model type genre. But she was so fabulous, and her home was part of her. It had been well documented already. So yeah.
Gotcha. And your work with Stannah, Wendy Roberts, just hints towards the question. Is your work purely campaign related with Stannah, or do you do work with them outside of this?
No, it's always on. That's the first campaign we've ever done with them, actually. So our retainer is always on retainer for now. PR, Facebook, and Instagram social. And
what does that outside of campaign work look like then? Just broadly, just because that's what.
They're paid media. Is that what you mean?
Okay.
So they spend a lot of money. They spend a lot of money in print media, or online media with ads, but a lot of money still in print media. 25x4s.
Okay, so the rest of the work is around paid media, and the campaign stuff that we're talking about here is the majority of the PR. Okay,
yeah,
get it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know, did the campaign translate into product sales? I don't know if you have that information. You might not be able to talk about it. I don't know.
Bearing in mind, we didn't have the landing page for the new Stairlift was very new, but the spike in traffic and inquiries was huge. We had to actually push back the start of the campaign, the launch of the campaign, because they weren't quite ready for the build to happen. But it fulfilled their book for the next 3 months, so they were very happy. Yeah. Brilliant,
great. Pooja Chowdhury asks, this is really interesting, but also asks, how do we how does something like this work in B2B tech campaigns? I mean, I guess it definitely could. You could use the same approach within B2B tech in any different market, really. It's not certainly not limited within this, is it?
No. I mean, it's find someone who's relevant to talk about the product. I mean, this was a product launch. This wasn't a brand activation, and it's quite difficult to get product in any media. So this was, tech is a little bit harder unless there's a handheld element to it as well. But yeah, find someone who's hyper relevant to whatever you're selling, and then find a way to creatively tell a story that the media are going to be interested in.
Brilliant. We're all out of time. Folks, thanks so much for all your questions. I tried to cover as many as I could, but we're a bit over now, so I shall let you all go and crack on with your evenings. Natasha, thank you so much for that insight. Really interesting case study, that one. Thanks again to Onclusive for partnering with us for today's session. And to confirm, we'll send around the recording as soon as we can. And thanks so much for being such an engaged audience with so many interesting questions. Massively appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you on the next PR Moment webinar. Do have a look at our events page. There's lots of further things going on, and do register if anything takes your fancy.